Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I want to talk about Memories of Ice, Book 3 of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, but I want to talk about it from the position of having read the whole series before, so from a reread position. What does the reveal at the end of the 10th book change in our understanding of this book? Now, if you don't want the end of the 10th book being spoiled, that big reveal, thank you very much for watching. But this is a spoilers all, whole series spoilers video. So I appreciate you tuning in, and hopefully you'll come back when you've already read the 10th book. For those of you that have, or those of you that really don't care about spoilers, let's get into it. So when we think about Kamensod as a narrator, this can give us a different perception of the events, give them different weight. And of course, part of that is it changes the context of the story. It's an additional piece of information which helps us reframe things. And as readers, the text has remained the same. The text hasn't changed. But because we have this additional information, now sometimes when we read a passage, when we read a scene, when we see an event, that event can take on different meanings. And knowing that Kamensod is the narrator, knowing where the series is going, that does actually give us a slightly different spin on some of the aspects. So for a start, let's think about some of the parallels between Kamensod and some of the characters, because Kamensod, for a book that is the Book of the Fallen, the book that he ostensibly is narrating about what happened to him, he doesn't feature prominently. This Memories of Ice is the first time he sort of features as an identifiable character, that we see things that he is doing. But he's very much in the background. He's very much a minor character. And, you know, from our perspective, quite often, because we live in quite an egocentric era, we can't understand. If I was telling the story of what happened to me, I'd be front and center most of the time. But that's not who Kamensod is. It's not why he's writing the book. If we take that conceit to heart, the reason he is writing this is both to memorialize and remember those that sacrificed themselves for him, but also an attempt to understand this whole situation. And because of that, we can sometimes see parallels where there are aspects of his story, the things that matter to him, that resonate with him, coming into the text and being focused on in the text rather than focusing on himself. So for instance, Panion, the seer, the Jagat seer of the Panion domain, was an innocent, thrown into a rent and suffering all of this pain because of being captured in this rent. How does that compare to Kamensod? Kamensod was minding his own business, flying around in the divine sphere, when he was captured and dragged down, broken apart into pieces, cast onto this planet, and then every era or so, or epoch, some gods would come along, they'd find another chunk of him, chain it, and use him as a battery, as a divine battery. He has been tortured for millennia. So we can understand why initially he would side with and understand Panion's position. But again, Panion isn't the main focus. This is about how Panion is dealt with by the other people, by the Malazans, by the Taistandi, by the other characters. We have the matron as this monstrous figure when all she wants is love. She's been driven mad because she's on her own. She's been locked away from all of her family, her children, her clan, her hive, however we want to describe it. So again, we have this very long-lived figure that has been tortured over an inconceivable amount of time. And we see that what she wants is love, is acceptance. And so there's another character in Memories of Ice that again bears some striking resemblance to Kamensod. And then we can take a character like the Maib. And you might think, oh, well, that's entirely different. But the Maib was a young woman, and through a magical rite, ended up giving birth to Silver Fox. And, you know, We like Silver Fox, it's Tattersail, there's a whole complication there. But the focus is on the Maib because she feels pursued. This thing happened to her, and no one told her that it was going to age her prematurely, that it was going to drain the life from her, that she, in effect, was going to become a living battery for Silver Fox, a magical battery to power Silver Fox's life. There is another connection to Kaminsod. So even in just those, we can see how Kaminsod is exploring his position, what happened to him through these different elements, and seeing how each one of them is treated a little differently, how these mortals um, engage with, attempt to help, or attempt to defeat. That each one of them, in terms of the abstract, shares certain commonalities. So there's the first thing, thinking of Kaminsod and what happened to him, and how there are other characters that when we think of their situation in the abstract, when we move away from the individual specifics, that we start seeing patterns. Now, the next thing is thinking about the relationship between the divine and the human. When we think of what happened to Kaminsod, he has been tortured by these god figures. But part of Memories of Ice is seeing a change in the divine realms, a changing of the guard, gods being cast down, mortals taking their positions. This is a period of tumultuous change. And this is, of course, of interest to Kaminsod because the old guard that has always imprisoned him, that has always tortured him, that has been present at these chainings and have abused him, they are being filtered out. There's something else going on now. Change is happening. And this relationship between the mortal and the divine, we saw it in Gardens of the Moon. Divine figures manipulating mortals. We saw it in reference to Raist as a tyrant, setting himself up as an ascendant, as a god to manipulate others. We see it now in all of these investigations of these massively powerful figures, like the Panian Seer, being taken down and defeated by mere mortals. The importance of mortals to this story is paramount. And that is something that I think Kaminsod is greatly invested in. He is investigating it because he is invested in this question about the power of mortals. These creatures, from his perspective, these creatures that live incredibly short lives and are entirely mercurial. In Gardens of the Moon, the bridge burners were fighting against the Taist Andi and Kaladin Brood and Kalor. In Memories of Ice, a few short months later, and think about it from a divine perspective, it is the blink of an eye. Suddenly, they're allied. And a lot of the animosity has seemingly disappeared, so much so that some of them have become friends, some have become lovers. On either side of this divide, that mere months ago, an eye blink to a divine figure, they would have killed each other. And this puts into perspective one of the elements that we see in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, that mortals are the agents of change. Where we have the Taist Andi rooted in darkness, an absolute position, the Taist Leosin rooted in light, an absolute fixed position, it is Shadowthrone and Shadow and these mortals, ascended mortals, Shadowthrone and Cotillion, mortals themselves, in this realm of shadow. Shadow may obfuscate, shadow may hide things, but it is mutable, it is capable of change. It ranges from the darkest of the dark shadows that are almost darkness, almost pure darkness, to something that is the subtlest shading that we can have, that is almost light. Shadow runs the absolute gamut. Shadow changes shape. Shadow adapts to the situation. The others don't. And so this focus, you can understand why there's a focus on shadow. There's a focus on these mortals and these adherents and connections to the shadow realm, because Kaminsod obviously is invested in this. And then when we think about Ganos Paran, Ganos, a pawn of the gods that has then set himself free. Well, there's a clear reason why the crippled god is interested in Ganos Paran, but also And this is a very important thing. And I think when we first read, we don't realize its importance because we see it very much from Gano's parents' perspective. And that's when Ganos recognizes the crippled god and sanctifies his position in the deck, in the organization of the magic of the world. We see that very much from Gano's perspective. We see it from he needs to do something about the crippled god because the crippled god is alien and outside of how the world is meant to work, then the regular rules don't apply. If the regular rules apply, then they can deal with him. So that's how we initially saw it. But now let's think about it from Kamensod's perspective. This is the first time that anyone in millennia have looked at him and addressed him as a person, as an entity, have recognized him as an individual, as Kamensod, as the crippled god. Up until now, pieces of him have been chained and abused. Gano's parent is the first one to look at him and sanctify and recognize him. So imagine for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years, you have had your individuality denied. And then this person comes along and goes, no, you are a person. You are part of this. We might be on opposite sides. We might be enemies, but you are a person. I recognize you. That moment is so different when we think about it from Kamensod's point of view. And I think that is one of the key moments that's very, very different. But of course, one major aspect of Memories of Ice, and it gets brought up all the time, oh, compassion, Malazan and compassion. So much so that I'm almost sick of hearing people talk about it in that regard, because quite often there is a lack of nuance about it. Yes, the series is investigating compassion, but it's not as simple as that. Kamensod is asking questions about, can we forgive the unforgivable? To what extent can we forgive the unforgivable? What things are truly unforgivable and what can be forgiven, and to what extent does that forgiveness apply? Can we ever be redeemed? These are all questions that Kamensod is investigating, is looking at from different perspectives. When we think of the prologue of Memories of Ice, we have the Imas pursuing the Jagat in their war. Is this a war? Well, it's a bunch of Imas chasing down a mother and two children. Not exactly a war so much as genocide. And then when we think, well, why are the Imas doing that? Because this is before they become Talana. And I think this is where the history of the Talana Mass becomes something that deeply interests Kamensod. And we see a lot of resolution of that in this story. I'll discuss that more in a second. But the Imas were enslaved by Rist, a Jagat tyrant. Then they rose up against him, and they were aided by other Jagat. They defeat Rist. They defeat the tyrant. And instead of then thanking the Jagat that helped them, they collectively made the decision that there is a chance that this will happen again. The Jagat are singularly too powerful. We need to wipe them out because they are an existential threat to us and our way of life. So they start wiping out the Jagat, regardless of whether they are tyrants or whether they were the Jagat that allied with them and helped them. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they are male, female, children. They are going to wipe out every single Jagat because every Jagat has the potential to become a tyrant, to enslave them. And they cannot resist that. It is too difficult. That is a pretty devastating decision to make. Now, we can understand, if not necessarily condone. So then the Imma start pursuing the Jagat. And unlike this mother and two children, some of the Jagat are hugely powerful and wipe out lots of the Immas. As a result, they realize that they are overmatched. And while they can get one or two here or there, they need something more. So they undergo the ritual of Tilan. And because of that, they become undead killing machines with one purpose: the absolute destruction of the Jagat race, of every single Jagat and descendant of Jagat, so that no tyrant can ever rise again. That's not necessarily the action of the good guys. But again, we can understand the position even if we don't condone it. And then, because of this prologue, we get an aspect of the Jagut's perspective. Here is a mother and her two children fleeing these Emas who are trying to hunt her down and kill her for the mere temerity of existing. And then another Emas arrives, picks up the children, ostensibly to save them, trying to save them, has intentions to save them, and condemns them to a rent in space and time that is going to torture them for all eternity. So when Panion is freed from this rent, we can understand his anger, his anguish, his pain, his wanting to lash out. Not only is his plan childish, because he isn't creating an empire that can control the world, he is lashing out and destroying the world, because at the center of the Panion domain is lifeless. They are consuming like a cancer across the world. They are consuming everything, destroying everything. And so from this, again, we look at things, and it's not about who threw the first stone. It's not about who threw the last punch. It's all about history is full of these sorts of actions. And we need to be cognizant of, aware of, and learn from the past so we don't repeat the same mistakes. But history should not dictate our actions, because as we see in this book, when given the opportunity to just lay down and die and be resurrected in the spirit realm, the Emas, the Tilan Emas, who are now kind of free, opt to go find and protect their fellow Emas so they can all go to the afterlife together. They don't want to be genocidal maniacs anymore. They don't want to be weapons in an army anymore. They have done their duty. They have served this empire, the Malazan Empire, as well as centuries, millennia of slaughter. And they are done. They are done with that. They changed their minds about their futures. For a race that made the decision to hunt down every single Jagat, to single-mindedly pursue them, to be able to change their mind, even after these hundreds of thousands of years, that gives Kamansod pause. And so when we expect to follow their story and see what happens next, that isn't of interest to Kamansod, because for him, the most important thing is they demonstrated the ability to change their mind, that they weren't locked into a cycle of behavior. They could evolve, even in their state. And of course, the reason for that, how this was achieved, was through the actions of a mere mortal, Itkovian who reached out and took their pain and stored it in this new dream world, this new pocket warren, where they could form and have an afterlife, where they could finally rest. And that issue with Itkovian is fascinating in this story. And I know everyone talks about Itkovian scenes and all those sorts of aspects, but I want to bring in a slightly different dimension here. When Itkovian was acting as an agent of Fenner, he was channeling these things to Fenner, to a god of war. How Fenner used it, what he channeled it to do, how it was utilized, that is irrelevant. Because what we are interested in is that when Fenner, like Kamansod, was cast down into the mortal realm and made manifest and made vulnerable, that Itkovian was cut off from this. But he still pursued his duty, even though it was going to damage him, even though he knew likely it was going to kill him, and even though it was going to happen at times where it would not be beneficial to the people around him. There was going to be a cost. Now, this is a point that fans and readers have long argued over. Why couldn't he just wait? And imagine saying to a bunch of people who have been enslaved, yeah, I'll free you next week. Not today. I need you to do this thing today. Definitely, though, next week. And tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow. What Itkovian did was the right thing to do. And the right thing to do is not always A, the easy thing to do, nor is it always the thing that's most convenient. It is easy to do the right thing when it benefits you. It is really difficult to do the right thing when it is going to cost you. And that is a lesson about Itkovian that I think a lot of people overlook. Why couldn't he just do that? A whole bunch of characters that I like got killed because of what Itkovian did. Like, yes, because he did the right thing, even though it was going to cost him, it was going to cost the others. He still did the right thing. He sacrificed himself and these other people to do the right thing. Now, think of the end of the crippled god. Think of the bone hunters. Think of those armies sacrificing themselves to do the right thing. This moment with Itkovian, with the siege of Coral, this is foreshadowing for the end of the series. And this is Kamensaud looking at this and going, how can anyone be so selfless? How can anyone do this? Is it worthwhile doing this? He is trying to understand that level of self-sacrifice, that level of compassion. And that's why when people talk about it, oh, the series is about compassion, it is usually said quite glibly and facetiously without considering what it means. And everything that Kamensaud is investigating is about this, is about investigating this, about trying to understand. When we look at the relationship that forms between Whiskey Jack and Anamander Rake and Whiskey Jack and Corlad, two very different relationships with the Tai Standee. One, comrade, the friendship and camaraderie with Rake, and then love and romantic love and sexual love with Corlad. How can a mere mortal identify with these things? Then, when we see the relationship between Tehel and Bug later, that has resonances that are set up here. This friendship and relationship between the uber powerful, the gods, the ascendants, those that live for thousands of years, and these mortals whose lives flicker in a mere moment from that scale. And so when we look at Memories of Ice from Kamensaud's perspective, it's not just about knowing that he's the narrator. It's actually thinking about the questions he is asking. How far does forgiveness extend? What can we forgive? How do these mortals forgive or interact with the unforgivable? Hanian the Seer does unforgivable things. He orchestrates unforgivable things. He is a true monster, but he is a victim. We see the Maid. The Maid maybe doesn't do horrible, mean, terrible things, but she's not exactly a character who we all warm to and go, oh, isn't she warm and huggable? But again, we see a different reaction about how people treat someone who is a victim, someone who has been wounded. And all of this started with Falison in Dead House Gates. And this becomes something of a key to a lot of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. The focus on victims, but not as victim, not at looking at what made them victims, but looking at how they are treated, how they are crushed by it, how they get out of that, how they are treated by others. The focus is on the ramifications and how they are treated and what happens to them, rather than the event. The event is usually detailed in the most sparing terms or with just enough information so you understand the full extent. But the major focus is almost always on the ramifications, what it sets in motion, how it affects them, how it affects the others around them. And that, I think, is a key difference. Kamensaud is absolutely preoccupied and focused on how victims are treated, because that is who he is. But we also see that his treatment of victims, his eye as he looks over these victims, doesn't excuse their behavior. It accurately reflects it. He doesn't make Falison into a happy, smiley, oh, look, she's a scrappy underdog who worked her way out and became wonderful because of it. He actually is unflinching in his gaze. And this is something that we see throughout. So it starts with Fellison, but look at the number of times that this concept of victims comes up in the series. And the very last thing I want to talk about is Tull, and perhaps the relationship with Talk, but primarily Tull. Remember, Tull, Onis Tulin, was introduced in Gardens of the Moon. He was introduced as a horrific killing machine. And as we go through, now we see in Memories of Ice that he has become human and is going to interact with the Barghast, in particular Hetan. That becomes a focus. This one character, I think, in a number of respects, along with Onrak, becomes a way of investigating everything to do with the Imas, everything to do with this movement between the immortal and the mortal spheres, everything to do with choices we make, vengeance or love, hate or friendship. These are considerations that Kalmansod is interested in, which is one of the reasons why I think he focuses on Tull, why Tull continues to be this thread throughout the entire series, just as his relationship with Talk. And again, it's not all happy, smiley. It's trying to strike that balance between cause and effect, ramifications for decisions. What follows your actions can sometimes be predicted and sometimes is unpredictable. And it's how we react and deal with these things that is a constant evolving measurement of who we are. And we don't sit there and complain, oh, well, that wasn't what I intended. We accept what happened and we move on. And we try to correct the mistakes of the past and we try to live the best possible lives. But we cannot go back in time and change things. And even if we did, then we wouldn't be the people that we are. And so that's why I think Kalmansod is so fascinated by Tull, someone who was the ultimate killing machine, or nearly the ultimate killing machine. Certainly one of the most powerful, deadly warriors on the planet who has killed untold thousands. And we know, more than likely, men, women, and children, like anything. He would have killed anyone and everyone as long as he deemed it necessary. And he wouldn't have spared anyone because he had no compassion. And we see this transformation into a loving father. That in this moment, he becomes human. He chooses to become human. He chooses to give up so much of his power to become a mere mortal. He chooses to give up this immortality for a short span of life, and he chooses it for love. And that is a very powerful statement and a very powerful aspect of the story. And it's one that especially comes up again in Tull the Hounds. But anyway, I've kind of rambled on enough about this. I'm sure there are lots of other aspects of this that we can start tying Kalmansod's perspective in to give us a bit of a spin on it. But I thought these were big points that I think help spur the conversation and hopefully will help you think about other aspects of it that you think that Kalmansod has a different reason for looking at. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support, and I will see you in the next one.